I am here with Joe Thornton Jr. You have seen him on television shows such as NCIS Los Angeles, Snowfall. If we read all his credits, we'd be here all day. But thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you for having me. I don't think my career is as much as I appreciate my career. I'm gonna turn on the light a little bit. Turn this light. Here you go. My career is not as vast as people think it is, but I've been very lucky.
Man, you have a lot of respect among actors, and stuff. That's something I noticed really quickly at the SAG-AFTRA strike and stuff and everything. A lot of people have a lot of respect for your work, and I was really taking in the people recognize your work and stuff. What was the inspiration behind you becoming an actor?
Wow, that's a big story. 1980, I was working. I had got my first corporate job at a hospital in Virginia Beach back in 1987. And after a year of working there, I realized that the idea of me being an IT person until I'm 65 just wasn't me. But I didn't know what else to do because I couldn't just go back to Taco Bell because I was working at Taco Bell for 6 years before I got that job. And I had majored in it at Hampton University. Though I didn't graduate at Hampton University. I ended up graduating another school years later. But I just think one day I got depressed. It was summertime, it was in July. I'll never forget, it was in July. It was hot outside. It was like 1988. And I was depressed because I felt like at 24, I felt like I wasted my time and my life a little bit. So I figured, okay, well, Joe, if you're not going to be doing this no more, you might as well look at the one ads and find something else to do so you get away from this. And while I was looking at the one ads, there was an ad in the paper about acting classes in Virginia Beach. And the school was like that far from where I worked. And I thought, and I looked at it, I said, yeah, okay, whatever. But then I turned back and looked at it, and something intrigued me about it. So I called the guy who was the teacher to find out where he's teaching class. Because I think what I needed was an outlet, some type of creative outlet, because I used to be involved in music when I was a kid. Okay. And
were you like in the band or?
Yeah, I was in a band, and I played in a symphony, youth symphony, and playing the bassoon as a kid. And I remember putting it down because I stopped doing it because my dad and I had a conversation, and it was the 80s. I mean, the 80s was a crazy time. It was all about materialism and all this stuff. And, anyone wants to go back to looking at the shows of the 80s, they'll tell you what the 80s was really like. It was all about, you need a JOB to be with me, that type of thing. And he thought I should major in something. I should do something that's serious. And I didn't know at the time what that serious is. I just chose computers because the computers was a big deal back then. Right. But then what happened was I called this acting teacher up and found out that he used to be a line producer for an old show back in the day called Gomer Pyle USMC. Oh, wow. And but then he just decided to retire and lived in Virginia Beach. And I said, okay, well, he must know, what this is all about, what acting is all about. And just like I said, I didn't know about the craft or anything about acting. I just knew that something about it intrigued me. And when I took that first class, the same feeling I got when I started playing a music instrument came back. That those feelings rushed back and feel like, okay, this is where I belong. I belong in this type of environment. And I wasn't thinking about LA. I knew I wanted to move to California. I didn't know how I was going to move to California. I thought I was going to be as an IT person, just living, because I kind of wanted to leave Virginia because it wasn't that. I had been there for a long time. I left Virginia finally when I was 29 years old, but I moved to Atlanta at first, and I'm bouncing around here. Let me just stay on track here. But anyway, like I said, when I took the class, it sprung up something in me that I hadn't had since I was involved in music. And I just said,
what kind of class was it? Was it like a scene study class or? What did you guys?
Yeah, it was just regular, just a scene study acting class, and I had no idea what I was doing at all. But you know, once you stay in it, you do learn a little bit. You understand the idea about it. It was not he was not my only teacher. I had another teacher, and then I had my foundation teacher who was foundation Meisner technique by a woman named Sylvia Harmon, who was my teacher in Virginia Beach at a place called the Actors Place. I think it's still around. But Sylvia died a few years back. And and that's where I learned, that's how I learned the foundation of being an actor, basically. And I understood about scenes and so forth in a more in-depth way, and how they're done and how they performed and so forth. So that's how that happened. I mean that's how I got into acting, and I guess I just could not give it up, because for something in me, it was just the outlet of doing something like this and being in an environment, a creative environment, is just where I belong. My parents were athletes. My brother was an athlete, and I pretended to be one when I was in high school. I ran cross country. I was terrible at it, but then I realized that when you see athletes, all these athletes that we see on TV, so these guys had a passion for it. They have a passion for athletics. I just had a passion for something else. You know?
According to IMDb, your first acting role was on 8 Simple Rules. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. That, I mean, I actually did a few years before that. I did a pilot for Dick Wolf called Arrest and Trial, but I didn't, I didn't make the. I guess that episode didn't air. It was like a test pilot. But 8 Simple Rules was my first acting gig, and this is after being in LA for 7 years. And I got SAG. I became SAG a year after I moved here in '96, and in '97 I became SAG. And I became SAG because I did a feature background film with the late Rod Steiger from Heat of the Night. And I got to kick him out of a hotel. That's how I got my SAG card. And but it took me, after that, it was just a lot of community theater and student films and so forth, because you could, I mean, it's great to be SAG, but agents want to know if you can, if you've had, a lot of agents it was a total different time. There was a lot of game playing trying to get in, and I got this role at 8 Simple Rules because of drop-offs. I used to do a lot of drop-offs in casting offices back in the day when you had to do hard copy drop-offs. There was no email, there was no social media back then, and I got that role without an agent, because apparently they had found a headshot that I had dropped off years earlier, and they called me, they paged me, because we had a pager back then. They paged me and left me a voice message, and said they wanted me to come in and read for the role of a police officer. And I read it. I came in, I read, and I went home and didn't think much about it. And then about that weekend, there was an awards ceremony for a play I did called Soldier's Play for COSAC, and over that weekend I got a call telling me that I had a call back, and I went to the call back, and then that evening after the call back, I got a phone call saying that I booked it. And it was, and listen, I was excited as hell, because 6 months earlier I was ready to leave the business. I was ready to leave the acting business.
What kept you going?
Soldier's Play did. Soldier's Play kept me in. Lamont, Rosemarie Coleman, I always say that they're the ones that kept me in the acting business, because I auditioned because I was packed and ready to leave to go to the Pacific Northwest and live up there. I was going to live in Seattle, which would be near Vancouver, and I can just cross over to Canada whenever I wanted to. But what happened was I got a call for an audition for Soldier's Play, and I was like, oh, okay, another play, another community theater play. I'll just do this one, and then we'll see what happens. And when I went to audition, I basically gave them did a monologue, and they liked it, and they wanted to cast me in it. And I met the actors I was working with, and we're still friends. Me and the actors are still friends to this day. I have to tell you, when you find yourself in a group of people that were so enthusiastic about a project, And Soldier's Play is just one of those plays that, this enthusiastic. I mean, it's based, most people, if you don't know what Soldier's Play is, if some people know, you remember the movie Soldier Story, Howard Rollins and Adolph Caesar. And the movie is based off that play. And I got to play Corporal Cobb in that play, and it was a lot of fun that summer. And I guess being in that environment, it really energized me getting back, being an actor. I figured, you know what, let me just keep doing this, because I felt so much fun. It was so much fun and so exhilarating that the idea of giving it up would have been, I think I would have been cutting my own throat. And I didn't want that to happen. And I didn't want that I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to live with that type of regret, And at the time I had been an actor 15 years, being pretty much from taking classes up to that point. And I figured, and I was about to turn 40, and and I was like, okay, all right, I'm about to turn 40. If it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. And again, it was a different time. It was 2004. It was a different time in those days. I was about to end, and I booked my first role before I turned 40. And I say, cool. I say, all right. And it took me 3 years after that to book another job. And but because I figured with the credit, it helped me get some agents, and because at least then I have a credit. And that was kind of an uphill battle for me. So
you've been on so many amazing shows, General Hospital, NCIS, like I was talking about, Snowfall, The Mentalist, what was your favorite experience, of all these credits?
Wow, that's a good question. Because that's something I never really thought about, because I did an episode, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and I think about that because Keegan Mike, it was like a Family Feud type episode, and we were one of the families, and Anna Marie Horsford played my mom, and and Keegan Michael Key played like the Steve Harvey, type. And it was so much. I remember it being so much fun, and my character was up there, hit the button, we about to hit the button, and then I forgot the woman's name that played one of the girl on the show. She hit the button exploded, and I had to back up. It's on my reel on my IMDb. But that was a fun experience. I would say 8 Simple Rules was just as fun because, like I said, I got to work opposite James Garner, and I was with Katie Seagal. And James Garner I go back with James Garner when I used to, as a kid, watch the Rockford Files on Friday nights. And to be right there in front to do a scene in front of Jim Rockford was exhilarating. And I think it's because it was my first. You always remember your first job. You remember everything about the smell, and unfortunately, it was 7 months after John Ritter had died, because he was on that show. That was his show, and he had passed away from I forgot the ailment. I think he had some type of thing that happened to him, got injured, and again, it was what you always remember your first gig. And I remember being on that set, and it felt like because it was in front of an audience, so you felt like you were doing theater. And it just went by, and I had to work that weekend night, that Friday night after we taped that Friday. I had to go to my regular job, but I was off during the week. I'm off during the week, because my hours are during the weekends. So I'm like, I go back to work the next day, that Friday, telling people, you'll never guess what happened to me this week. It was so exhilarating and so much fun. But and NCIS LA, I definitely had a great time on that one, because it was kind of a recurring, because I was on 3 episodes playing the same character, and meeting the cast members, and it was a lot of fun. It's hard to say. Every job I'm very grateful for, but I will say, as a Trekkie, to be able to I did an episode of a show called Blunt Talk, and I played a police officer, and I got to work with Patrick Stewart. Okay. And as a Trekkie, to be in front of this man,
amazing, yeah.
That to me, and didn't remember him as Professor X, of course. Yeah. I mean, to work in front of that legend, to me, was even awesome. I mean, I felt like I because I do want to do a Star Trek one of these days, and that's why it was great to when we were on the strike line seeing Jerry Ryan walking
Yeah,
around.
that was awesome.
Yes,
It was so many like great people and stuff like out at the SAG strike. I love the camaraderie. You know, now that the strike's over, like what would be like the dream role if you could like pick any role that you wanted to play?
my goal, I would like to do some type of post-apocalyptic type films. You know, the rugged. Because I played a lot of cops and doctors and so forth, and I something about being in those trenches when you're in the survival and trying to survive and trying to deal with forces coming at you. Um, I don't know. There's something. It really digs down deep into your human psyche to me about how people. I mean, I forget the role that Will Smith played and Denzel played as a couple of these types of movies where you're out there
I
and
Am Legend,
yeah, stuff like that. I would love to do stuff like that. I would love. I think the greatest.
I could definitely see you cast it in something like that. Like, now as you mention it, like, it's interesting, like, that you I guess like, as an actor, like, sometimes you don't really get like necessarily to pick your role. You got to work with like the scripts and stuff and everything that you given the opportunities that you have.
Yeah,
Like, do you feel like, that sometimes you haven't been able to express like as much of your range because you talked about, playing police officers and, doctors and stuff like,
it isn't from lack of trying. I've took all my representations that I've had in the past. The biggest contention has always been the types of stuff I want to go out for, and that's always been it's like this. And I don't know why, because I'm just as capable of doing it, and I've done rugged type stuff when I was in theater. So it's not like I'm it's not something that's that far removed from me. And especially when I'm the guy now about to turn 60. I'm definitely,
congratulations though. You look young. I wouldn't have guessed that you were that age at all.
yeah, I turn 60 in May, coming up May.
Yeah.
And listen, I I think people my age would be great in a role like that because they'd be part of the struggle. I used to like shows like The Walking Dead and so forth, when you see things where people are going through this craziness that they have to deal with. And I just find those shows, I just find them that type of stories fascinating, you know, and because it's always about the struggle. Um, and
I think
that's great. That's a dream role for me. I mean, that's something I want to do more of, that type of stuff.
definitely we've talked about before, like, social media metrics
Mm-hmm.
and versus like, craft. And I've seen you speak about it on interviews. Like, could you talk about like, just like, the idea of social media metrics versus like, mastery of the craft? Do you feel like there's too much of an emphasis on like, social media presence?
Well, here's what I've had to come to the conclusion of, and people can take this any way they want, but this isn't show art. Unfortunately, this is show business. I've been hearing this over the years, and people are going to cast based on how they can sell you, and how you get sold. I was never one of these actor purists because I understood even in community theater, people cast you a certain way. Um, I The only thing I can say about that is there's so many ways to work your craft in this business that you can do. Whether it be doing scenes or being in acting class or whatever, as long as you feel like your instrument is tuned, then you go out for. But if you're just some person off the street that they like because they like your look or whatever, and you've never acted before in your life, and you just happen to fit what they're looking for at the time, and you do a good job, okay. I mean, that was your journey, and it happens. Look, I mean, look at people like Schwarzenegger. I mean, he was a bodybuilder and he got Conan, and his careers took off. I mean, then he became the Terminator. Okay, so I mean that's what we know him as, and it's worked for him. Um, did he have any formal acting training and so forth? He may have taken classes after he got his first role because he could afford it, and he may have continued on. And I think he may still be. I don't know. I mean, The Rock himself, he was a wrestler, and then he became.
Right.
He was in that movie. I think that Egyptian movie. I forget the name of that movie. The Egyptian movie he did, and he was in it, and charging away with his rock body, and then he did Be Cool. He did that movie Be Cool, which I thought was hilarious. Him playing that a gay bodyguard or whatever, the baseball bat. I thought he did that monologue he did from set it off. He did one play both female characters. I thought it was hilarious. And I said to myself, to a friend of mine, we were watching that movie. I said, that he's gonna be a star now. Watch, he's gonna be a star based on this. And yeah, he did. And luckily for me, when I became an actor, I wasn't thinking in terms of Hollywood or if I was going to be famous. I just looked at it as a creative outlet for myself from the mundane life of being an IT person. And that world, the IT world is now long gone now. I don't even do that world a long time ago. I just do odd jobs while being an actor and just just stay with the craft. And I try to. I'm in a voiceover class with a guy named Richard Tatum, who is a fantastic voiceover teacher, and I work my craft in different ways. But to answer your question about social versus social media, I don't know. I'm seeing people doing all types of stuff on social media, and I look at it because it's our job. You have to know it's our job to know these things of what's out there. And yeah, people are doing, posing some certain different ways, and clothes sometimes are no clothes. I mean muscles and just to be seen, just to be in a project. And sometimes the producers are watching, and then casting people are watching, and they may bring them in. If they do a good job in the room, great. If they don't, they'd be like, okay, well, okay, he fooled us.
What would be your advice to aspiring actors?
Oh, wow. The advice I would give to actors at this point, the only way to do it to me is to do it. And that may be in class, that may be in stage, that may be in student films or whatever, where there's so many mediums to be an actor. The only way to do it is to do it. Don't do it for the fame, because that's not up to you. That's up to the audience and how they feel about you when you appear in front of them. I would say to actors, don't get. Kate Burton said something at a scandal panel at SAG, and I yelled at the screen when she said this, because it's happened to me. Be careful of a manager that will bring you in and want to represent you and tell you there is a plan. There is no plan. It's a lot. There's no plan. You just go in from audition to audition. Hopefully that you book a job, and that job may lead to something that you may be right for. It may lead to that next step, that next level. I just think, like anything else, like sport, and another thing, acting is not sport. Let's not act like it's. I don't know why people act like it's an athlete. You have to train like a sport. Acting is not sport. It's an art. It's an art form. Sport, I have no done to this. Like I said, I have parents who are athletes. My brother's an athlete. I have nothing against it. It's just not. It's not. Acting is not sport. Don't act like it. You have to train like you're an athlete. I mean, you can train, but just act. But knowing that acting is basically at the end of the day, something that by Sylvia Harmon had on her wall. Acting is living truthfully under imaginary circumstances.
Yeah.
That's what acting is. And if you don't understand that in your head, don't have that in your head every time you're playing, because you're playing fake people, but they're telling stories. And if you don't understand um, that basic thing, you're going to have a problem, because you're going to be thinking that, oh, I don't think this character would do that. Well, I mean, well, you're not that character. Okay, you're being the character. You have to look at it from that standpoint. I keep it that simple when I do. I remember that every time I go to an audition, I'm acting truthfully under imaginary circumstance. It's in my head. It's kind of a mantra for me, and that keeps me out of trying to do it right. Okay. Because I think a lot of actors try to do this thing right because they saw someone become successful. They feel like they have to do it that way. You don't know what that person's process is to where he got to. We don't know Viola Davis's process. We don't know Denzel's process. We don't know. We don't get to know. You have to find that within yourself by doing the craft of acting. And there's a lot of books out there that tell you, how an actor should. I mean, and you could read those books, and I have read some of those books, and I find myself like glazing over, because I'm like, okay, another person has their technique. You have to kind of have your own technique that makes your instrument work.
What would be a book that you recommend, or a book that really inspired you as far as with acting?
Well, the book by Sanford Meisner, about being an actor, it helped me, because I'm not a method actor. I think to me, being a method actor is kind of dangerous.
Yeah, that's what people say.
I just don't. I mean, look, it may work for some people, like say Daniel Day-Lewis or whatever, but I just find that type of using your psyche that way is unnecessary.
I definitely I studied at Lee Strasberg, and I can definitely attest to
you might know my friend Dylan Mooney. Then you might know my friend Dylan
Mooney. You introduced me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's next for you? The SAG after strike is over.
What's next? Right now, I'm currently not represent. I do have a manager that I just signed with, and I'm gonna be honest with you. I feel like after the SAG after strike, I feel like I've finished a long running play, and now that it's over, and you don't have to worry about getting to rehearsals at a certain time or whatever, which for me was the strike lines. I feel like I have all this free time to breathe a little bit. And I mean, I'm going to the informational meetings because there are certain things about the strike contract that I'm kind of shaky about. And one of them is AI. I don't like the idea that AI could replace us as actors. I think that's my concern. I understand that there are guardrails that they said they put up, but I guess I'm just more concerned about it. I mean, I'm gonna look at the information meetings and hear what is being said, but at the same time, I know AI is not going anywhere. But I do know this: the profession of being an actor in this business has now changed, and we have to kind of accept that. It's not, you can't go back to what it used to be. That's over. I mean, I think as actors, this strike was like kind of our own little pandemic.
Yeah.
And now that it's over, it's like it's a different world now. and we have to survive in it. And listen, I mean, after I first saw the first webinar this past Monday, I'll just say this publicly, I basically cried because I was like, oh my God, this is totally different now. This is a totally different. We're in a different world now, and we have to figure out how we fit in it. Pretty much, besides all the other stuff that we've gotten, which was great. We got a lot of great stuff through the negotiations, and my hats off to the negotiation committee. But the AMPTP kind of showed me who they were, in my opinion,
Right.
and they are mostly. And I was like, okay, well, now I know what you guys are like. Now, as an actor, I have to operate based on that knowledge.
Yeah. It's definitely made me like, see things like, from a different perspective. Like, it doesn't seem like actors like, are appreciated for like what they do. And like, we go through so much, like, we take classes, and like, I was like, watching an interview, I think like with Terrence Howard, and he was talking about like, when he was paid for Hustle and Flow, he was only paid like $12,000 and stuff and everything. Like, do you
It's
feel like,
unbelievable.
yeah, yeah. So it's like, I think like, we're kind of underappreciated. And like, for what we do bring to the table. Is anybody you want to shout out?
Not really. I'm not gonna shout at anybody. I'm not gonna put them. I'm not gonna put some people. Well, I will. I will say this, that I have with my group of actor role models that I've followed and been able to talk to face to face. One of the first ones, a guy named Phil Morris, and I got to work with his sister Iona playing her son in a stage reading years ago. And I was a fan of Phil Morris since he was on the Young and the Restless. So I can shout at him. Another guy by the name of Christophe St. John used to be on the Young and the Restless, and he passed away years ago. I was a fan of his, and I got to meet him in Norfolk, Virginia, years ago before I left Norfolk. And another guy by the name of Terrell Tilford, who's done so now. He has an art gallery down in Mid City, and he's still acting. He and his wife was ex-wife now. They're actors, and I was a fan. I'm a fan of their work, the types of work that they've been able to do. And like my friend Rico Anderson and my friend Dylan Mooney and some other actors, my friend Rick Worthy. And these are people that some of y'all probably saying who listen and saying who. I mean, but you know who they are because they work all the
Yeah.
time. And those are the people I watch. Those are because I watch what they do and I ask their advice and so forth. Um, and there's a few others. If I miss your names, people, I'm sorry. I'm just like I said, it's just
You talked about like, some really good working actors. Is there anybody like you want to work with that you haven't had the opportunity to work with?
Well, those guys, for one, I've never worked with any of them.
Oh,
And I would love to work. I would love to do a movie with Denzel only because I only because I'm curious about what it'd be like to work with him. And I know that he got this movie that he and Antoine Fuqua are about to do, and I would love to be a part of that movie because it's still that grittiness and that whole going back in time type of movie about the Carthagins of Rome and so forth, and Denzel's playing the lead Carthagen, um, and it's gonna probably be done in Africa and or somewhere close to it, and about the Middle Ages, the Middle Ages. That would be great. That would be great. Something I would love to do, tackle.
how about any directors and stuff that you would like love to work with? Like, who would be your dream directors? Like, three. Give me three.
Um, who wouldn't want to work with Scorsese or and some of and other up and coming directors. I would love to work with Regina King. She's a director. Um, I would love to work with. Oh shoot, he just came out. He was in my head, and it just because it's so funny when I look at films and so forth. It's hard for me to tell one director for another because I just know the film. I just know the films are good. I'm just never been focused on a director per se.
What film were you thinking of? Like, in mind?
Well, I was thinking of Quentin. Yes, that's what it is. Tarantino. I would love to work with Tarantino because I was a super fan of Pulp Fiction, and I saw the other films he did before that, but I was a super fan of Pulp Fiction, and I said to myself, Quentin Tarantino is someone on my bucket list I would love to work with, and the free range he allows his actors to be and so forth. I love that. I feel like he's an actor's director, pretty much. He let the actors go, and he just turns the camera on, and that's the impression I get from him. I mean, so those are the three. I mean, and I said Regina King because I've seen Regina King's career for so long,
Hey.
and she's finally getting her flowers when she deserved a long time ago. And heck, I would have Cicely Tyson before she died. She said she wanted to direct, and she was in her 90s, and she wanted to direct. And she told it to Gail King. I was like, oh shoot, I would be there. I would be there because I got to work with her as a background person in Atlanta, playing one of her sons in The Oldest Living Confederate Widows Tell All. It was my first time meeting Cicely Tyson. And I
Wow.
remember my first movie as a kid was Sounder, and she was in that movie. That was my first movie as a kid back when I was 7 years old, and I got to see Sounder. So see her,
That was the first book I read, Sounder.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
And but seeing the movie, her and Paul Whitfield, they just did such a great job with it. Um, you know, but like I said, that would be, those are my directors. I would, I would love to. These are people that I've always wanted to. And some writers, people I work. I like Aaron Sorkin. I like David Kelly. Um, who's the other writer? Writers that basically write real dialogue the way people actually speak. So trying to do all this crazy language and so forth. That's where I am pretty much.
Definitely, man. Joe Thornton Jr., it's been a pleasure. I wish you the best, like you know what I mean, in your career going forward, man. I know, like you know what I mean, and stuff. I can't wait to see you on the screen again,
Man,
man.
I love what you're doing, man. I did
Hey,
this content you're doing is fantastic, fantastic. I mean, I've seen your work as an actor is great. Is great. I was very impressed with you.
I'm
So
impressed. Like, yeah, man. I like and stuff. I was talking. Everybody's seen your work. I was like telling them, like it was like I showed my I tell people like about who I'm interviewing. I was like talking to my dad earlier, and I was like, "Who you're interviewing?" I was like, "Oh," he's like, "Oh, I know him. I've seen him on TV and stuff." Like,
well, that's great because, like I said, I there are times I don't even think my stuff ever gets. People don't even know who I am, which is fine. I mean, I'm not trying to get into someone's radar and so forth. I'm not trying to be famous. I just want to work, do what I love to do, and work it, and whenever I
But,
can.
like, to be honest though, like I feel like, at the SAG strike, standing next to you, it was like, one of the few people and stuff, you make me look good. I was like, man, it's everything. All these people have like so much respect and awe for you, Joe. And like, I appreciate you for taking the time and stuff, everything to come on my channel, man.
Well, thank you for having me. I mean, like I said, when you said we're gonna do an interview with me, I was like, interview me for what? Well, I mean, I'm not that big a deal, but I appreciate it. I really do. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, man. I love your humility, man. Like, you've accomplished so much, and like, it's really awesome, man. Get a chance to talk to you and stuff and everything. And like definitely let's do lunch sometime, man, and stuff and everything. I
Absolutely.
appreciate you.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, let's do that, man.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Have a great one.
Yeah, you too, though.